It is episode number 5 of You Matter IL. And why do we call it that? Because, well, you matter, Illinois. You matter world. But you matter world, I don't know, it just doesn't sound as catchy. So we just decided, you matter IL. I am Mo from 97.7 QLZ. As always, my co-host, she is Angela Cummings of the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention. How are you today?
I am very good, and I am very cold, as almost probably everyone is here in Illinois today. So everybody stay warm.
Very much so, very much so. And you're holding up all right? The family's holding up all right?
They're doing well. They don't really want to go out there and de-ice the sidewalk, but we'll have to see how that goes after
I like
school.
how you're just like drifting off. You're like, I think they're doing well.
No, they're in virtual school somewhere else in the house. I don't really know.
Well, that's good. If you do have a child or a teenager who is struggling, we've covered that in an earlier episode. So again, each week a different theme here on You Matter. This week, Angela, what are we talking?
We are talking about mental health and suicide prevention, specifically in a couple populations. First responders, and so that's fire and EMS, for example, military, active military, and then veterans as well. So we're going to try to just touch on those three general areas. Those populations tend to have much higher than average suicide rates. And so just talking a little bit about suicide prevention for them and mental health resources for those populations.
I love it. Very important topic here. Thank you to Upper Limits for supporting this episode. With that said, we actually have two guests helping us out with the topic this week. Angela, who should we bring in first?
Well, we have two guests that I was introduced to through another board member at AFSP, and I'm very grateful to that board member for being such a great contact and getting us such great guests. Gifts. They're gifts. They're going to gift you with their knowledge. So today's guests are Taylor Venturini and John Tolley, and I will kind of let them talk about their own background and how they're connected to the cause.
Excellent. Welcome, guys. How are you today? Taylor, what's up?
Good. Thanks, Angela. Thanks, Mo. So my name's Taylor. I am a licensed professional counselor. I am with Perspectives. We're an employee assistance program based out of Chicago. And I am a supervisor there for a team of clinicians, but I also specifically do some mental wellness check-ins, assessments with firefighters, and we've also done some for police officers.
And speaking of police officers, John, what is your backstory? How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thank you. I'm a just recently retired Chicago police officer from 34 years. I believe Chicago is one of the higher rated police departments with suicides, and it'll be 3 years in April where I was going to take my life, and I've recovered, or I'm in recovery from that.
And John wrote a book too. He's being humble. He actually he has a published book.
Right. I live with, which I discovered, I live with bipolar 2. And while I was in my manic stage is when I was going to commit suicide and, or take my life. We don't say commit anymore. I wrote the book Disturbance with a Mental, which is poems and short stories about mental illness. It was while I was manic that I wrote it, and it's tried to express what goes on in the mind of someone who is living with a mental illness.
And especially in such an important job, an important position such as yourself, I'm sure at times adding to everything was the pressure of the jobs, big city, life or death situations. It's impressive. You are still here. You're saving lives, but you saved your own at the same time.
That's right. We're exposed to an awful lot. We are constantly exposed to the evil of what humanity can do to each other, and that adds up. And to top that off, you're afraid to talk to somebody because you're afraid to be weak or viewed as weak. To man up to it and, John Wayne it, so it was very difficult to actually go and get help. It's there. It is there. We have a terrific EAP employee assistance program, but you have to get to it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
do you
that's
think
something.
yeah, go ahead, Taylor.
No, I was just gonna say that's something like we see a lot. And I can always talk about this, but that's what a lot of departments see. So a lot of chiefs have come to us that, you know what, I think we just have to make this mandated, just like we do a physical. We got to get these mental health, mental wellness check-ins, because yeah, there's that stigma around mental health, and just, you know what, I'm the hero here. So if I ask for help, I'm going to look as weak. And with police officers, there's the potential of getting your FOID card taken away,
Right.
which then there goes your job. So there's a lot of trust concerns there and issues that, you know, I'm not going to tell anyone what I'm going through, because I'm just going to be perceived as weak and potentially lose my job if there's something more severe going on.
That's actually a really good point. I was actually going to ask you both about that. I know that there's kind of a pervasive stigma, you know, particularly in law enforcement. And I'm not so sure because I don't work that closely with firefighters or EMTs, but I know that just, you know, by word of mouth, that if you ever get to the point where you require some residential treatment, you know, for a mental health issue, my understanding was that if you're a law enforcement officer and you've been to residential treatment, you can lose your ability to carry a firearm. Is that correct, John?
If you are in a secured facility,
Okay.
so I can go to residential, it's fine if I can leave the facility. If I get hospitalized, then they will take away my FOID, my firearm owner's identification card.
Okay.
Which I will then lose my job for.
Right. So I can see how that would be a huge barrier to help seeking for law enforcement. Is if I start saying anything at all, is this going to, you know, sort of snowball into me losing my job, right? And so it can cause people, I would think, to just hold on to a lot of things that they should probably be talking about, right? Because as we all know, stuffing your feelings and stuffing your bad emotions is just going to lead to worse outcomes. So just from an EAP perspective, Taylor, so, you know, let's just say, even you're not necessarily with the Chicago Police Department, you know, if employees are concerned about stepping forward, not just a first responder, say, for example, but it could be a veteran or active military who is having like some carryover PTSD or mental health issues, like, are there ways that who should they talk to? How can they ask for help within a work setting without feeling like they're going to be stigmatized or punished or lose their job? Or maybe you could kind of talk people through how that would happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's really nice about an EAP, because I know a lot of departments have like their peer support programs, and sometimes that works for some people, but not everyone. They feel like, okay, I'm going to my peers and they're going to know, are they going to talk about it? It's not like a true mental health setting. And that's where I think the EAP can really help, is because it is kept confidential. I mean, of course, departments might ask for like a utilization report, but it's not going to have people's names, information. That's all confidential. So it's really a safe space that they can go to, that they know no one's going to know that they're calling. They can do it on their own. And then really, you know, we always make sure to ask, you know, anyone who's calling in, you know, what's going to work best for you? Do you want a clinician that specializes in first responders, or does it not matter to you? So, you know, just making sure they get with someone that they're going to be comfortable with, and get the most out of counseling. And obviously we all know, I mean, as some people might not be aware, but EAP is more short-term counseling. So if they do need something that's a higher level of care, you know, the only time, you know, that confidentiality is going to be broken is if they report any harm to themselves or others.
Sure.
So if they do have to be referred to a higher level of care, you know, that's something that's going to stay confidential. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I think that's just where EAP can be really helpful, because it's not, no one's going to know unless you tell them about it.
Sure. And it could be at least a first step to getting that treatment. And then they can decide if they need to take like further steps and really get in with a, you know, licensed health professional or whatever. So John, when you were, you know, actually active and not retired, did you see any warning signs in yourself that that maybe others could have seen? Like in hindsight now, it's like, well, I was, doing this or that. And if I saw someone like a colleague doing that now, I would absolutely know that that is a sign or a risk factor.
My wife and family had absolutely no idea. You hide it, and you're an actor, but the interesting thing is I work with the crisis intervention team unit, where I train officers how to handle someone who's in mental illness crisis and talk them out of suicide and talk them down from their crisis and get them to a hospital for help or living room counseling, like Trinity Services and NAMI have living rooms.
Mm-hmm.
So my own colleagues were unaware of what was happening with me during this whole time. Well, there was one that I started sending out emails to people telling them how much I really appreciate them and how great of people they are and everything like that. And one person picked up on that. But it wasn't until after I got help that they said, I recognize this.
Mm-hmm.
So there are steps that we are afraid to act on sometimes. I think you mentioned it in one of your podcasts, how with the teenagers, how you're afraid to talk to them about, ask them the question, are you thinking about suicide?
It all comes back to just being really direct in terms of asking the question. I mean, it seems like a lot of these episodes that we're doing all kind of circle back to, you just have to ask the question. You just have to look for the signs. And I guess, I think maybe those manifest a little bit differently in law enforcement, first responders, and, active and veteran military. I know one big issue, of course, and probably Taylor can speak to this, is I think, one reason that the suicide rate is a bit higher, well, quite a bit higher in these populations, is that most of these populations have pretty quick access to a lethal means, being their firearm. And so I don't know if either of you have any, experience or recommendations, or, when you think someone's in a crisis situation or maybe entering into kind of like a not good space, maybe they're not even in a crisis. Like, do you talk to them at all about safely securing their firearm or make recommendations, or do you have any kind of tips about what we could do? Say, for example, if someone watching this now lives at home with a first responder and they're thinking things might be trending poorly, like what could they maybe do in terms of that to remove that lethal mean maybe?
So that's something like with these check-ins I do, I haven't had that, but we do at Perspectives, the team I supervise, we have calls all the time with things like this where we have to, assess safety and make sure. And I would say the number one thing is if someone is reporting that they've been having thoughts of wanting to harm themselves, and they have a weapon or they have a plan or they've thought about something and they have access to that plan, we need to, I'm usually going to speak with a family member, a friend, any trusted person in their life, can get them on the phone and say, can you take their gun away, their weapon away, whatever it is that they're planning on using, and have them hold on to it until we get that individual help and they're in a better headspace. So I would say that's really the number one thing as a clinician, is making sure I'm speaking to someone who can take away that access, especially if they've been having thoughts of it or they have a specific plan.
John, I suspect that's not for a law enforcement person, like handing someone your firearm is probably like handing over like a part of your body or just a core part of your personality, I would think, almost, right? Like,
oh, it is. It's you relate to what your job is.
Sure.
You become that job, and it is, that's my right arm, and that would be very difficult to do that. I have had situations where we've had a supervisor come to an officer's house, and he had to surrender to the supervisor. It's a very difficult thing to do. So I don't want to say, a family member can do it secretly,
Sure.
I don't know if, but again, if you're in that situation, I believe that you're talking to the individual, say, look, I'm concerned, you're at that level. So
Right. Hopefully you could kind of convince them to voluntarily,
Right.
Yeah, I think that's like
temporarily.
yeah, I feel like that's so true because I think I see more with police officers than firefighters because of that FOID card. That they're really not going to be trusting and want to talk about it. So if they are coming to us and expressing how they're feeling, they're either, they're at a place where they're ready to get help. Because I would say otherwise, they're probably not even going to come, call us or tell me.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. That makes sense.
And another thing about the EAP, which is great, is it's for the families as well. So if my wife is concerned, she can contact the EAP and talk to a counselor there, and then they can work out a plan to come and help as well.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's actually a really good point. Yeah, we're talking about it in terms of the employee, but it's also for the family of the employee, right? No, that's actually a really good point.
When did you see the change happen, John? With 34 years on the force, obviously 34 years ago, something like this you probably didn't talk about at all. And when in your career did you start seeing that conversation become more acceptable?
I would say within the last 5 years.
Okay.
As Taylor mentioned, the peer support program came out, which has its good and bad, as you mentioned, but it still brought mental illness to the forefront. It brought situations that, hey, I'm concerned, and it's that you can start to talk about it more. So I think once peer support was really prominent, starting about 5 years ago, was what I saw.
Okay.
Also, just recently we got more counselors for our EAP. We had three counselors for the 13,000 officers that we had.
Oh my goodness.
Now we have 12. So
do you have EAP officers for the officers for the office? I mean, like 3 running that many, that's got to be stressful too.
Oh, sure. I'm sure they have their own counselors.
Huh. I can't even imagine. And of course, we're talking about first responders and whatnot, but then you start bringing in the military, the armed service aspect of things. The PTSD is big. I'm lucky to have a partner here at the radio station. One of our clients is a yoga studio, and they actually have classes seasonally for veterans of PTSD, discovering that is a means to help the cause. Of course,
sure,
different strokes with the different, for different folks, but the military, I can't even imagine some of what they go through.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree that probably what's going on with all across all the board here with our first responders, with our law enforcement, with military and veteran, is all some degree of PTSD. It's all some degree of seeing or hearing or witnessing, things that would be very disturbing for anyone, and then having to kind of push through that, and then having to kind of be that superhero. Like, I can't let this show that's bothering me. I have to keep going. I have to push through this. And I have to get up and do it again the next day, whereas if we witnessed a traumatic event, we would be down, like we'd be calling in, we would take a month off. I can't, I saw something terrible happen on my street corner, and I've gotta take time off work, but this is like the work, like this is what they do, and every day could be just another repeat of a traumatic event. So I think we don't have anyone on this particular podcast episode, but maybe we should do a follow-up just for veterans to see kind of what the process is to get them. Yeah. But I imagine it's really kind of the same risk factors in a sense, and then it's kind of the same protective factors in a way, just trying to make sure that there are ways that they can not just keep things bottled up inside. AFSB is doing a lot of research into PTSD in terms of like what medications might help, which is sort of a side note, but really cool, and trying to kind of get away from that. They've been doing, some SSRIs, but then kind of getting away from that and doing some different types of drugs that help people specifically with like nightmares, because it turns out that those types of medications help people with PTSD. It may be like a similar area in the brain, I guess, that's being fired up. So anyway, just some interesting research going on there with AFSP and PTSD medications. But yeah, it would kind of be an interesting follow-up to do, just to see exactly what the process is for active military and for veterans when they need to seek help, because from what I understand, it can be a little bit of a convoluted process and a little bit hard to get those resources. So
Right.
maybe a follow-up if we can find some good guests for that particular, aspect
Yeah,
of
that'd
it.
be great.
Yeah.
Because
I
I
would
know
love
that their suicide rate is tremendous as well.
Yep, absolutely.
And,
Yep.
it is. It's accumulation of what they see. An example of roadside bombing. Then the next day you still have to take that road.
That's right. Yes.
So
I feel like, and I feel like the term defund the police is a politically loaded term, and I don't even really like the term at all. But as a suicide prevention expert, in a way, there is one aspect of that I really can understand, and seeing it from the law enforcement personnel perspective. If you're asking somebody in a given 12-hour shift to rescue a puppy, take down some boring information at a traffic accident, walk into a homicide situation, and then turn around and try to tell these teenagers who are just talking a little bit too loud. It's like you're all over the map. You're from the highest crisis that you could possibly think of encountering to the most warm and fuzzy interaction you could possibly think of when you think of, the friendly officer in blue, right? So it's like I feel like our law enforcement are being asked to wear so many different hats in any given day that, of course, I mean, who could just change, like that back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And you can kind of see how after enough of that, you walk into a situation and you're not even sure what hat you're supposed to have on.
right.
Am I officer friendly here, or is something horribly dangerous about to happen and I need to be, like a tactical military person almost ready to react, right? And I can see how the stress of that must be enormous for our law enforcement. And so that, just taking a little aside there, that defund the police is very politically loaded, and I don't even want to go into that term, but I can see how from law enforcement perspective, it might be nice to have some of these different roles divvied up a little bit, like you're training people, John, to be crisis interventionists, and, maybe they kind of specialize in that. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about how that might kind of improve like the overall mental health of your standard law enforcement officer.
It would be tremendous. I still remember the first call I had. I was just turned 21 and I'm on the job. And the call it's a domestic disturbance, a married couple. What do I know about marriage, that's been going on for years here? And these two are arguing over the remote, but we have started a program. The CIT division has started a program where counselors are going out on the mentally ill calls.
That's great.
So we're trying to build that up. It's kind of like an experimental stage, the mobile crisis response unit.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm out in the suburbs of Orland Park here, where we have a program now. It is a mobile response unit where counselors go out with the Orland Park police. So that's helping, once the police establish safety in the situation,
sure,
then the counselors can talk and do their thing,
mm-hmm.
So much better.
That seems like that would lead to improved outcomes, not just for the people who called and the people who need help, but for the officers who are responding as well too. I imagine that's a huge pressure you have to make a split-second decision. Is this person just having a mental health crisis, or are they dangerous, or are they both? It just seems like it's a lot to ask of our law enforcement officers, and you can clearly see how that just adds to the stress and then just leads to even more, risk factor for suicide attempts and general bad mental health, definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we see our counselor, Jack Daniels, and everything's okay,
Well, right. And of course that's a sign too. I guess there's a lot of alcohol use and things like that. So yeah. I can see it.
Yeah, I think
So
it's
I've
really common in, sorry, Mo. It's just really common in, some of the police officers I've spoken with, and even some of the firefighters that are like, our way of coping is just going to the bar. And like, that was such
Yeah.
a big, like, that was the culture. And I think now there's that barrier is breaking a little bit because, I mean, we see in retirement a lot, there's high suicide rates, that's probably not the answer. So I think things are like, like I said, I've worked with a lot of chiefs in different departments. And I think as they've moved up, they're like, something needs to change because this doesn't work.
That's good to know. Yeah, the culture is kind of changing from within as well as,
Yeah.
yeah. That's a good thing to know.
We definitely need to see that all around in every industry. If we could just improve mental health and take it seriously, then that's great. But I had heard, like, going back to the military, and John might be able to speak on this as well. When you do something for so long, again, active officer for 34 years, and then you don't have that in front of you anymore, or if you're in the military and you're always in these danger zones, and now you go back to a normal life, I've heard that can be pretty challenging and pretty triggering as well. Did you experience anything like that in your transition, John?
Well, I kind of transitioned in the last 3 years on the job. I took the role of the CIT trainer. So I've left the streets, and I was off the streets for quite some time. So I kind of gradually moved myself out. And right now I'm a recovery support specialist. So I use my mental health crisis that I went through as kind of like a peer support for someone else who may be in crisis, and say, look, I've been there, I can help out. So that's what I do now. So I'm still working what I was working at, but I'm not in the Chicago police anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Thank
Right.
God.
That's a nice smooth transition, or smoother transition, I would think.
Yeah.
John.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because it was, if you're doing it, as you said, you're doing this for so many years, and all of a sudden you got to have a plan. You got to work it down,
Right. Sure.
That makes sense. Well, we're last few minutes of the show here. So if there's anything else that we should bring up, any other sites, any other advice, what should we do? Taylor, Miss Professional, what do we do? Give us all the answers.
Yeah, I mean, so really, I just kind of throwing this out here, something that I've found to be helpful. And John, maybe you can give some insight that maybe you would have appreciated this when you were a police officer. But, really something that we at Perspectives have found helpful working with different departments is, again, like I mentioned earlier, I think because not everyone is going to be open to talking to a counselor, calling it the EAP themselves, going to peer support. So when you make it, I hate using the word mandated, but when you make it just like they have to do a physical, just like you have to just make sure your physical health is okay, your mental health is just, if not more important. And so making that a part of the department requirements of, okay, you're going to get a physical every year, and you're just going to speak with a counselor and keep it consistent, keep it the same counselor so they become comfortable with them.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not seeing someone different all the time. But I think that's something that's extremely helpful because it doesn't put the attention on one person, like, oh, Larry's going to talk to peer support. What's wrong with him? He must be crazy.
Right.
You know what I mean? Everybody has to do it. And so it becomes more normalized of like, oh yeah, I met with the counselor, and I think it's just going to open that discussion. I've gone on ride-alongs at at a fire department, and it's really much like a family. And I think they would just be open, like, oh yeah, I had my session today. Like, how was yours? And it's like opening up that conversation. So I think that's just something that just should be considered to just make it part of the requirements.
I think that's a great idea, Taylor.
Yeah. They tried to do something like that where they sent out a questionnaire, a mental health questionnaire, to do anonymously, but everyone that I've talked with is like, yeah, sure, it's anonymously, right?
Oh, yeah.
The lack of trust is
Yeah.
not very high.
Not there yet.
Not there yet. But I agree with you. That would be, if everybody had to do it, yeah, maybe we will pick up those a few officers who are on the edge. You know, granted, you're going to have 80%.
Sure.
I've been there.
Right.
I did them with a police department. And I will say, when we first started, got lots of like, I don't trust you. I'm signing my name on the sign-in sheet and I'm leaving by. But as we were there for a few months because it was such a large department. I will say, like, people got the word across that, like, hey, these guys aren't the bad guys that we think they are. So yeah, I think if it becomes something where it's just year after year, I think naturally people are going to be like, okay, maybe we can trust this.
Right. And a culture shift always takes a little time, right? I mean, it usually
sure.
doesn't just like snap your fingers and things are completely different. So, but it sounds like with the help of perspectives and the EAP you have going, you know, and the peer counseling you have going at the Chicago Police Department, hopefully like that culture change is at least starting to roll along, and maybe it'll snowball and pick up some speed, you know, as things roll along too, hopefully.
A great note to end on here. Bernie leaving us a note here saying such a great topic to talk about. Officers put a lot of effort for us, and we should be doing the same for them. Thank you, John and Taylor. Hopefully this will encourage police department leaders to help officers trust that help is there and is okay to get it. Could not say it any better ourselves. Again, on behalf of Angela, thank you, John, and thank you, Taylor, for being a part of this discussion today. Hopefully, if we can start changing things little by little, we'll look back on a podcast like this and be like, why did we even have to bring it up?
That would be great.
That is the deal. And of course, Angela, thank you for all your help today as well.
Of course.